Hi, welcome back to another video, and I thought I'd do something a bit different. I would talk about some of my music. Some of the other channels have started to do something similar, including Cinema Dave, Solitary Ronin, etc., SJS, talking about the music as much as the film. So I thought I'd take you through, by way of introduction to my musical tastes, what were some of my top albums of the year. Some of these will be very obvious choices from anybody that follows music, and some may be a little less so, but very much falls into what I listened to this year. So first up is a vinyl release that I have here, and it is the Monophonics with It's Only Us. And the Monophonics are part of a label called Coalmine. And if you know who Coalmine Records are, you're almost certainly a collector of their albums. They are a soul funk, very much 70s inspired label, and most of their albums fall into that kind of genre, although there's a bit of psychedelia, saying something like Ghost Funk Orchestra or whatever. And they put out the releases mostly as collectors on vinyl, and here is one of the releases this year. Now, they were impacted quite a lot by COVID and the pandemic in the past year, so a lot of the releases slipped to this year, and they've got a heavy release schedule this year, which I'm happy to see. But Monophonics is the group of an artist called Kelly Finnegan, and Kelly Finnegan's solo album from the year or so previously is one of the finest albums in my entire collection, and if you get the chance to listen to that, that'll give you a pretty good idea. But Monophonics are pretty much the same idea. They are that 70s, I would say, almost, that kind of stylistics, that kind of feel. That's who they remind me of, that kind of sound. They've got the slushy strings, they've got the horn section, and some really great songwriting and great vocals, as you'll see from Kelly himself there. And it's just another great release and set of songs from that band, from that label. And I mean, they're very much like a label that reminds me of when I was a younger man in my early teens, and I used to collect dance CD singles, etc., and I would have bought everything by certain labels. So people like Positiva, anything that came up with a Positiva on that label, I would have bought just instantly, because that was just the kind of, they never did me wrong. And it's curious, and it's quite similar to the movies, but I mean, just so many great songs on this. Last One Standing, I think, was like the singlish kind of release. That was the kind of thing that we're going for, and it has this lovely long instrumental section with the horns, and it builds with the bass and the slushy strings, and then if you want an idea of what they are as a label, Last One Standing is a pretty good start. It's catchy, it's soulful, it's funky. Check it out, and just an absolutely gorgeous release. And if you can get it early enough, and they do get released within an independent records labels, you certainly get them on Amazon. You'll get plain black vinyl, but if you get in at the start, you'll get your nice coloured vinyl. And because I'm a big fan of the label, I tend to collect them as soon as they come out and get the coloured label that there is within it. So not only a lovely release in much the same way as collecting physical media for the Blu-rays, etc., is also nice, but this one's very much about the music, and a beautiful. You can even maybe see on the front that that's a little insert, and that actually changed depending on the release that you had. There's a little pull-out thing that's nearly like a frame print of it, that goes along with it. So that was my first one. The next one falls into a realm of music that I used to play when I was younger, and it's some of the most interesting music that's been released currently, in my opinion, and that is jazz. And there's a lot. The London jazz scene, Shabaka Hutchings and Nubia Garcia and all, is just amazing at the moment. But actually, two of the things, they're both Blue Note albums. One is from sort of that scene, but this one's an American, and it's his debut release for Blue Note, and it is Ron Miles, and it is the album Rainbow Sign. Know that I listened to this in streaming for a long time, because there wasn't a suitable kind of UK release as far as I could see. It was out in America, and you could pay over the top for the vinyl release. And vinyl is, aside from the Coleman Records, jazz and vinyl is the only kind of collection that I do of those, although not exclusively. And this is basically, Ron Miles is a cornetist, which is kind of unusual for jazz in itself. But for me, the real star of this album is the guitar playing of Bill Frisell. And Bill Frisell had his own album out this year called Valentine, which is also very good. But I actually think he shines even more on this Ron Miles record than on that. And one of the things that'll really point out about this is that, I mean, it's a very tuneful album for the most part. Some of the, like the Rumour and Queen of the South, etc., are all very, very tuneful and they're nearly soulful in the jazz. But the first track, which is like a 15-minute track called like Those Who Dream, is very discordant in places. It'll be, you'll not find it maybe as pleasant to listen to the first time. That's one of the nice things about jazz, is that the more and more you listen to it, the more you will have a feel for what the artist was trying to do and actually how it fits together, especially as all the drums and bass and guitar, etc., all weaves in together. But it's a bit discordant, and it didn't really seem to fit with an awful lot of the rest of the album, except this album was written in the aftermath, less so as a tribute, as far as I can see, to Ron Miles' own father's death. And put in that context, the discordance in that first song makes a lot more sense. So that is just, I mean, a pretty typical jazz record, although a very good one with a modern tone. And again, cornet is not a piece that you see very often. And I would say you could talk about any of the Blue Note releases this year that were great. Go-Go Penguins was great. Joel Ross's, followed by LP. He's a vibraphone player. It is great as well. If you like something that's a bit chilled out, etc., that's a great one to go for. But the other one that really caught my eye and caught my ear probably more closely this year was Tom Misch and Yusuf Dawes, called What Kind of Music. Now, this is a bit of a weird combination and a bit of a weird one to be put on Blue Note. As you see, I only have it in CD, and it fits into the genre of stuff I like to collect in CD, because it's more than anything, it's an electronic album that's a bit funky and a bit vibey the whole way through, which is Tom Misch and his kind of bit that he goes on with it. And for a lot of the album, you'll be wondering why it's kind of even on Blue Note, why the traction is really there. What you have is Yusuf Dawes, which is a drummer out of another band or collective from London, called Yusuf Kamal. I'm pretty sure their name is. I remember their last release and really liked it quite a lot. And the drumming is very much, I would say, it grows as the album gets put together and as the album kind of grows itself. And just some of the stuff that's in it starts off very like nearly almost like acid jazz, that kind of Jamiroquai, all of that kind of stuff to start off with. Some MCing, good vocals over the top, but as I say, as the album goes on, it kind of grows in this influence, and the jazz drumming gets a bit more intricate, and it kind of swells, I would say, in the last 100 and Liftoff, those kind of tracks that are there within it, and it kind of builds like crescendo before kind of finishing off the way through. I couldn't recommend this more highly to anybody that likes those kind of genres of funky jazz, electronic-y vibe stuff. That What Kind of Music, I think, is a great release and really interesting. And again, I'll stick links to these down in the description as I go through. I haven't many to go. Actually, I didn't pick too many. You can probably see from the length of the video. I've got Haim's Music and Women Part 3. I've always kind of liked Haim. I think the first album is really great. And then the second one I didn't get into as much, etc. But Women in Music Part 3 is, I mean, it's a long album. It's got 16 tracks in it. And it's very much, to me, an indie pop album. There's not too much that falls outside that scope. But it's an interesting indie pop album. I do like the mix of female voices that are within this. I do like the fact that it is very straight up and down what it is. It doesn't veer too much off from the theme of what Haim have done beforehand. But it's a collection of very good songs. And there's not much more I can say to it about that, other than, that if you've listened to Haim before, it's another Haim album, but Haim write good songs. The instrumentation of it's kind of interesting, but still very predictable for what you think of the genre. So definitely one that I enjoyed quite a lot. And And I have to say, I know it's not very highly thought of, but I do like a good bit of pop or indie pop done well, or pop influence stuff. You know, it gets besmirched that sometimes, I am a fan. And none more so than actually, well, I mean, this is a cracker of an album. This is Jessie Ware's What's Your Pleasure? And I have to say, I'm a bit of a Jessie Ware fan, but as her albums have went on, I've liked them a bit less. Like Glasshouse wasn't as good as Tough Luck, etc. I've even done a cover version of a Jessie Ware song I like that much. But this album has got special sauce, is the bit that I would put in it. Each song has, you know, a theme, a vibe to it. It has a hook. And then every song has just this wee extra bit of something. And it's something that, for me, in the production, that's a bit different each time that adds to it. I just think Jessie Ware's What's Your Pleasure is an absolute cracker of an album. It may look plain on the artwork, etc. inside. The book just basically has the lyrics inside it. Although I do wonder, it's a man of my age, and as good as my eyesight is, reading lyrics off a CD booklet is tough. But anyway, again, jazz, funky, vibey, disco-y, nearly almost Jessie Ware. Really great. Love that album to bits. And before I come on to my last one, I'd like to highlight this, and it's not really new music. I didn't really want to go down the road of re-releases or reissues, although there were a lot of albums this year from older classic artists, so to speak, like Bob Dylan's album. I thought was excellent this year. It wouldn't quite have made my list because, you know, nothing compares to the 60s, early 70s Bob Dylan for me. He's me Paul McCartney and Paul McCartney 3, and I've listened to that a lot. It just kind of goes a bit up and down for me the whole way through to be considered really great. And Neil Young had the re-release of Homegrown, but that's a 70s album kind of reissued. But this one is the Joni Mitchell Archives Volume 1, and I was brought up on Joni Mitchell. I just think she's just one of those people that's just insanely talented and insanely underappreciated in lots of ways. And this is a re-release of her material from 1963 to 1967, what they're calling the early years. Lots of recordings that have never been heard before. Some stuff that ended up on albums subsequently of her going, and it has a wonderful interview with Cameron Crowe, the filmmaker inside, that's going to make up as these catalogued and go forward, as they do more and more of these releases, it's going to build on what Joni Mitchell thinks, etc. And it's really, really, really interesting. But what you have here in this release specific, there is 2 single LPs that are 2 of the basic sides, so smaller concerts, smaller recordings. But this is a 5 CD set. This is the collector set, and it is brilliant. It's going back to stuff that's her very early radio station days, songs that she just recorded for her mother's birthday. They're all kind of put in here, and they were curated from people sending in recordings that they'd found of her, that they'd heard. And if you know anything about that whole time and the folk scene, especially with Bob Dylan, I'm reading Bob Dylan's Chronicles novel at the moment, or his biography, so to speak, autobiography. You know, you'll get that a lot of these people worked together, knew each other before they became recording artists, etc. And it seems to be a similar vibe that Joni Mitchell grew up in as Bob Dylan did. And I just think this release is just wonderful. It is just beautiful. It's 5 CDs. It has that quite thick book inside with the interview, etc. inside it, with the pictures of Joni in the front and pictures of Joni inside in the interview. And then the CDs housed within this lovely box. I can't wait for the next one. I'm an unashamed fan of Joni Mitchell, having been brought up on her, but I think they're very special. What to do. And the last one is undoubtedly my favourite album of the year. And again, probably no surprise, given that I'm a bit of a fan of this artist in general. But I don't know about you. Anytime an artist that I'm a fan of that has had a great debut album and maybe done some bits here and there, you're worried about that when they hit a bit of success, it'll drop off. You know, the sound that you were a fan of isn't quite there anymore, and it's happened numerous times over my life where that happens. And this artist is Phoebe Bridgers, and this is the album Punisher. And honestly, I think Strange in the Alps, her debut album, is amazing. It is absolutely incredible for such a young songwriter to just both the instrumentation and the songwriting and the storytelling that's in the album. It's just, I mean, she's one of those artists that I would say is heartbreaking in what they put together, but Punisher just took it up another notch. I mean, she went on and did made the supergroup with Julian Baker and Lucy Dacus, for Boy Genius, and that EP is brilliant. And then she did Better Oblivion Community Centre with Conor Burst from Bright Eyes, and it's great as well. And here's this solo album, and Conor Burst plays a part in some of the later tracks and playing on these and writing on them as well. I mean, it's cutting from start to finish. The songs that are on this, I mean, the song that it ends on, I know the end, and again, it's one of those things. I love albums that build to a crescendo and end on a real high and end on something amazing. Like the DVD menu and then going into Garden Song are pretty great. There's some really interesting decisions on how they decide to instrument that in some way, and then it goes into Kyoto, and I have a song that tears through me every time I hear it, even though I've heard it, I don't know, many times now. Kyoto's lyrics and drive, etc., in that song are just magnificent. My favorite song as well as my favorite album, Punisher. I mean, there just aren't bad songs on this album for me. If you like singer-songwriters, if you like especially female singer-songwriters as I do, ironically or unironically, Phoebe Bridgers has taken the space of who would have filled this hole for me previously in songwriters. Like, I was a big fan of Ryan Adams, and if you know anything about Phoebe Bridgers and Ryan Adams, one of her most famous songs before this, Motion Sickness, was written, we didn't know at the time, about Ryan Adams and his abusive relationship that he had with many young girls, and I can't bring myself to listen to Ryan Adams anymore. Father of two daughters, I know it's stupid, that separation of art, etc. I just can't do it with him. I've invested so much in myself and how magnificent he was. I've seen him multiple times in concert and was such a big fan that I struggle. I'll probably get there one day, but it's one of those, he's a new album out, and I just can't quite bring myself to listen to it as much as I've loved his music. But back on topic, Phoebe Bridgers and Punisher is just amazing. And it's actually quite nice. I usually hate these fold cases things that go on, the CD contained inside, but this one's actually at least a bit substantial. And I hate the very singular ones that kind of get lost on the shelf. Those are my albums of the year. It might give you some insight into what I like, which in general I would say as pop or singer-songwriter with a bit of jazz. No rock this year, which, you know, actually is quite unusual for me. I did like some things this year. I did like Deep Purple's new record, and I liked actually the Flower Kings. If you listen to Flower Kings, that's a really, really interesting record. And no hip-hop this year for me, which is again quite unusual because I usually have something that I really gravitate and grab onto this year. And Run the Jewels' new album didn't do it. The thing that came closest was Clippings, Visions of Bodies Being Burned. If you like hip-hop, the only thing is it's a mix of like a horror record and a hip-hop record. He does some really amazing things with tempo and you know, effects, but because it's a horror hip-hop album, the whole thing from start to finish just starts to feel a bit oppressive, and there's no real relief from it. And for me personally, listening to it from start to finish, I always get to a certain point of the album and go, God, this is too much, as brilliant as a lot of the album is. So that's my run. This has went on for far too long. If you have any other favourite albums that you think you should check out that fall into this kind of scene, certainly hit me down with it if you want, and I'll get back to you. But if you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you next time. Take care. Bye.